between January and November of last year, I put about 10 million lines of usable functional code. And 10 million lines. A super developer might put out 50 lines of code in a day. I'm either an outlier or a leading indicator.
Hi, welcome to Season 2 of AI Confidential, a show about AI and how to benefit from it responsibly. I'm Aaron Fulkerson, the CEO of Opaque. Today I'm joined by my dear friend, Mark Hinkle, who I've recruited to be my co-host when he can make it. And also, we'll be speaking with Reuven Cohen today. Mark?
Yes, I am Mark Hinkle. I run a network of AI newsletters, and I'm super happy to be here with my old friend Aaron to chop it up.
You've been a multiple time entrepreneur from early internet to open source and then cloud infrastructure. You've built and sold several foundational companies that are still in operation by their acquirers, like Cloud.com at Citrix. And most recently, you're solopreneur in it in the AI space. I think that's probably a better way to introduce you, Mark.
That probably is. I seem to be an early adopter of every technology wave, and a lot of times I go to the next one before it's time to cash out. But I think I finally found my calling for AI and really just helping people understand AI. I haven't been this jazzed since my first company back in 95.
You know, it's funny. I have not been this jazzed about technology since I started. Well, I guess it was like the internet, you know?
Yeah, that's for sure.
We're at this human level transformation experience that is accessible to us for creating net positive. To your point about doing something that helps people this week, well, depending upon when this drops, it was this week while we're recording it. You were responsible for the first ever All Things Open AI conference in Durham, North Carolina, which I had the honor of coming and speaking at. And you had, I mean, I know that day one, it was like 800 people. Day two was about 2,000 people. You did an exceptional job with the event. Talk a little bit about the event.
I had been doing a meetup in the Raleigh-Durham area for about almost 2 years now. And the excitement and trepidation around AI had been building, and I really wanted to do something for my community. And one thing that I realized over time was I could go help people at a soup kitchen, or I could deliver meals on Thanksgiving. But what I had as sort of a talent was just to help people understand technology, and there was this huge appetite for it. So I partnered with a gentleman by the name of Todd Lewis, who does the Southeast's largest open source tech conference. And we spent day one training, you're right, 750 to 800 people on how to use generative AI, both business people with knowledge workers, and then deeper tech people did something called retrieval augmented generation, which most of you have probably been thinking about how you use your data with large language models. And then day two, we had speakers from all over the globe come to Little Durham, North Carolina, and we had a packed house of folks who were interested and at a deeper level than I'd seen. Like, nobody really cared how the cloud works. People really care about how AI works. It's a little scary. They've seen the sci-fi movies. And so I had people sit through deeper tech than I would have guessed would be interesting to the layperson. And they really enjoyed it. They raved about it. As you know, you were there. People were really excited about this and had access to, some of our speakers were just out of this world. The head of AI research for IBM, the head of AI for LabCorp, the testing company for like your blood samples at the doctor, he's building 5,000 models for his company and explaining what they do. And it was very much a look at the future. So yeah, I can't go on enough. It was probably the thing that I've done in my career that had given me the best feeling, and I had some really highs in my career, so that's saying something.
Everybody was walking around talking about, Mark said this, Mark said that. You were a superstar.
I know. It
Taking
was
selfies
very
with you.
strange. It's so uncomfortable to be at all the center of attention for me. I just want to be part of the gang.
And I shared on, I think we were on, I don't remember. Oh, I know what it was. It was in the other podcast. We were talking about how you got your name Minkle, which is
Yes.
because Will Hurley goes by Whirly. So we dubbed you Minkle. All right, AI in context. Here's the thing that I'm going to say, putting AI in context from this week for me. Going to your event, I spoke with well over 100 people one-on-one. Thanks for having me as a speaker. We also had
Sure.
our technology executive event the day after the conference. Here's what I was surprised by. It was clear that there's 3 waves to AI. There's wave 1, the AI sandbox, where you have a bunch of pilots going. Wave 2 is you've deployed AI into production. It's probably doing something with a knowledge base. It's not differentiated competitively. It's not providing you competitive differentiation in market. It's something that's giving you some productivity tools. It's kind of table stakes.
Hmm.
I call that the AI plateau. The third phase is the AI powerhouse. And the only way to deliver on the AI powerhouse is your proprietary data combined with AI is what gives you differentiation in market. That's the only way to differentiate. You see, this is obviously the case as models commoditize. Everybody's going to be doing basic automation and productivity gains. That it's the AI powerhouses, competitive differentiation with your data. So the thing that surprised me was the companies we saw at your event. I expected to be in the sandbox phase, maybe thinking about going into the plateau phase. That was not the case. Most of them were in the plateau phase, trying to figure out how to go into the powerhouse phase with sensitive data. Did you have the same experience?
I did. I feel like I think young Ben, as we've been calling him, one of the speakers from Google, had a great point, is that people are doing one of two things. They're either asking questions, they're getting knowledge, or they're trying to get an action. And I feel that plateau is that knowledge, like we're creating knowledge bases, we're generating insights from our data. And where people are trying to get to is the promise and around agentic AI and everything else, where you're actually doing work. You're taking those knowledge insights and you're creating reports and you're creating products and you're extending your workforce in a way that is an exponential gain. So I agree 100% with you that there's a lot more people in layer 2, but I think that chasm or gulch or whatever gap between step 2 and step 3 is a lot wider for people today, even though that'll close very quickly because the AI is just getting so good so fast.
Mark, let's get Reuven and catch up with this old friend of ours. He's someone who's always been on the vanguard of technology. Currently, he's doing it with Agentics, and I can't wait to talk to him about agents.
Yeah, I don't know anybody in the industry that is doing anything as advanced as Reuven and doing it in the open so people can learn from it. So it's super interesting.
Welcome to the pod, Reuven. It's wonderful to have you. I know that the 3 of us get together. The first time we we did get together and record a pod was, I guess, just about a year ago, and we never dropped it. Mark dropped it.
I dropped it because I didn't have AI good enough to help me edit it, and I got frustrated and just blah.
Well, we got to talk and chat. That's good enough for me. Now we get to do it in a public forum. Even better.
Well, we have known each other for, all 3 of us. We met about 19 years ago at Silverado Resort in Napa, back in the heady heydays of the open source revolution that was occurring in 2006. It was 2006. So Mark, why don't you recollect how we all met? You go first, Mark.
There was a lot of business folks there, and we were a little younger in our career. And I think we were sort of like the kids that hung out in the back of the room and threw paper airplanes. We were all out on the front steps. It was Reuven, yourself, and I think Ross Turk, who did SourceForge, and we were just chatting about it because there were business people that thought there was a gold rush here. And then there were us just trying to figure out that I think there's a gold rush here, but it's sort of cool. So we're playing with this tech. And, you know, I always remember Aaron was wearing a hooded garment. And I've definitely decided that it is a jerga and you just don't remember. And for those of you that don't know what a jerga is, it's like that burlappy hoodie that you can buy at a concert that has like the band's name on the back. I don't know why I believe that.
It was not a jerga. I undoubtedly was wearing cargo shorts like you.
We were both wearing cargo shorts. But everybody
and
else was wearing suits.
Yeah, everybody was in suits. Although Reuven at the time was nicely dressed. I recall him being well dressed. He's always pretty dapper.
Yeah, he is.
Except for today with his Maple Leafs jersey or T-shirt on or whatever.
He's representing, man.
Yeah, representing. I was overcompensating with clothing, so that's fine. That's what you did 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, I was wearing a Mind Touch T-shirt and a pair of cargo shorts. I was not wearing a jerga.
Every business meeting I go to from now on, I'm wearing a tracksuit, like a record executive. That is my
like an Eastern European.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm part of the Russian mafia. Like I took Bert Kreischer across the Ukraine in a train or something like that.
Yeah. Well, Reuven, I remember us meeting and riding on the same bus to the wine tasting and talking to you about Anomaly, which was a cloud infrastructure play you did. And you were like, it's basically just a botnet and China uses it. I'm like, what are they using it for? He's like, I don't know. That was my recollection of Anomaly in the early days.
That's Aaron's.
I'm like, is it like DDoS attacks? You're selling DDoS attacks to China?
It's hilarious because it's taken 19 years to realize the vision. I think you might have grossly simplified it, but the inspiration for a lot of the early cloud computing work that we did was based on this idea of distributed sort of computing that was running autonomously, could self-optimize and deploy, and some of that we were able to do, some of that maybe not so much, and it took a while, but here we are.
Did you coin the cloud, and did you the term cloud computing, or was it elastic? Which one was it, or both?
So no, it wasn't cloud. So what I in 2003, a group of us, I guess, we dreamt up this idea of elastic infrastructure as a service, and the elastic part was kind of dropped, and became infrastructure as a service. And then in, 2005, a couple years later, I'm still trying to promote this infrastructure as a service concept. We were SourceForge Project of the Month. If you're familiar with, SourceForge, if you're old enough, that was the place before GitHub existed. And I think it was a guy named Larry Augustine was the CEO at the time. And, he was quite into it. And that was the sort of door opening for a lot of interesting opportunities, which later became known as cloud computing. The most prevalent was the crew over at Amazon. This is pre-AWS, and they were working on basically something that looked like a grid orchestrator. For those that are old enough, there was a project from Sun Microsystems that basically, I think it was like grid.com. So back in those days, no one was quite sure how to orchestrate large systems. So this idea of workload, sort of, data-centric, management was the thing. And anyway, my big thing was, well, you don't need to orchestrate specifically on the data. You can orchestrate on the runtime, the operating system. And if you containerize it, you can scale each part of your stack independently from one another, which is revolutionary for then. Now it's like, well, obviously. And that led to an invitation to be an outside advisor to Amazon in early 2006. Yeah, that was a big change. And so at that point, they were organizing around their S3 service, which had gained quite a bit of traction. And that was a sort of offshoot of some of the early affiliate work they were doing. So a lot of these websites that were basically selling affiliates, to Amazon were doing quite well, making lots of money. And they had no easy way to sort of, to host their little web apps and images and things like that. So S3 was launched in early 2006, and that blew up really, really quick. And then, just hosting your images and static HTML is not that interesting. What if we could, deploy the entire LAMP stack, Linux and MySQL and that sort of thing? And what was interesting, this is the hidden unknown story of cloud computing. So we, back then we launched in August of 2006. And right before the launch, I think it was Eric Schmidt from Google got a little tour of the data center and the infrastructure before, and then he preempts the launch of EC2 with Elastic Compute Cloud on an investor call and basically says Google is the cloud on this call. And everyone's like, what the heck's the cloud? And this was 2 weeks before AWS was going to launch. And all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, Google's the cloud. And we're like, what? No, they're not the cloud. We're the cloud. We're the Elastic Compute Cloud. But the damage was done. Cloud became a thing, and suddenly we were riding this wave. And the only way you could get into the EC2 beta for the first year was if you knew someone who was already in, and I was that guy. So essentially, I was handing out beta passes to people, and I landed like NBC Universal and Oppenheimer Mutual Funds and all these companies that wanted to leverage it. And the only way they could get in is that they called me and said, can you get me a beta pass?
I wonder if that's how because MindTouch was in the beta also. And I remember in 2006 at eTech, Bezos was there and Werner was there. I worked with Werner at Microsoft when I started my career doing distributed systems research. So I don't know if I might have gotten it from you, because we were one of the first production customers, first 10 on AWS back in 2006 at eTech. We were at this event drinking beer with Bezos and Werner, and there was like all 10 of the original production customers were there. I wonder, it's entirely possible I got it from you.
Andy was my guy back then. He was managing that project, and it was quite possibly. I remember that was my thing. It was early access, so that I pivoted from open source consultant to cloud computing platform.
So you've been at the bleeding edge, or not the bleeding, because you're really cutting it, of every major technology supercycle. You have some fun videos of you as like a very young child building websites in the very early days. Was it even that video of the news where they're like interviewing you?
Cyber designer.
Was it pre-internet or was it internet?
It was pre-internet. So I'm what a nerdy kid grows up to be. So when I was about 9, I decided to create a Wildcat BBS. This would have been in 1987. And I downloaded the software, put it on my Tandy computer, and then everyone I knew in town would call and access my Oasis BBS. And my parents would freak out because they could never use the phone. It was this weird noise, and I had 2 modems, so I could only do 2 calls at a given point. And then that led to a beta project with a company called Sierra Online, which was famous for their King's Quest games and various sort of, graphical games. And they were trying to create an online gaming platform called Imagination. And this was like, we're talking like 2600 baud modems. Like, this is slow. This is in the 80s. That project failed. But what was interesting, that all the beta testers for Imagination were given to this new upstart that were planning to launch a online web service based out of Virginia, America Online. And they were going to launch that in partnership with Microsoft's launch of Windows 3.1, which now had a new graphical user interface. So that was really exciting. So they sent me a copy of Windows 3.1 and allowed me to test with a super fast modem, which was like 5600 or whatever the number was. And that was my entry into sort of, it was pre-web, but this was America Online. And this is roughly when I was about 10 years old.
So I was there with you. I grew up on a little farm south of San Jose, but I had a San Jose phone number. So I could dial into all the BBSs without paying $2 a minute in long distance fees. And I was building MUDs. So we were mudding, multi-user Dungeons and Dragons, where we'd dial into the BBSs, we would build out the MUDs and play them with everybody in the Bay Area. I mean, I still miss that. By the way, I have recreated that using ChatGPT. And I don't know if you guys know Cote at VMware. Yeah, I think you guys all know Cote. Have you seen what he's done with his single player Dungeons and Dragons in ChatGPT?
No.
Oh yeah, he's got YouTube videos of him playing D&D with ChatGPT and how he prompts it and sets it up with context, and he's playing Forgotten Realms by himself in ChatGPT. It's pretty awesome.
He's nerdcore strong with him.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is all these things relate to one another for me. Like I am a teenager traveling, doing, cyber design. By the time I was in high school, I was traveling all over the world. And wherever my friends were getting jobs at McDonald's or Walmart, I was, traveling to New York or Los Angeles and doing these web development gigs. And this was 1994 at that point. So, I'm 16. And, one thing led to another. By the time 1999 rolled around, I met Sean Fanning on a IRC channel. And he had an F-bot, for those that are old enough to remember what F-bots are. Basically file bots. You could share, this new crazy tech called MP3s. And I'm like, what if we slapped a UI on top of this thing? So there you go. I got to design the first UI based on all the Winamp skins I was famous for at that point. So it's like I'm like the Forrest Gump of tech. If you look sort of behind, you'll sort of see me possibly in the screen. I'm never in the foreground.
I was
That's
so
awesome.
hoping that you would get to that, Reuven.
We were actually going to ask you about that was one of our questions, was you being the Forrest Gump of tech. Thank you for pulling it out. Much more organic
100%.
than us asking.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
you fast forward through every major tech super cycle. It's like, okay, you were there pre-internet with BBSs, during the personal computer with Windows 3.1, the internet early days, file sharing, open source, which then turned into cloud. Now I saw recently, I posted something on one of your LinkedIn posts about you've come completely full circle, and you started to talk about that a moment ago, which was back when we were looking at elastic cloud computing, how would we build scalable infrastructure that could operate autonomously? Well, it wasn't autonomously, it was pretty far down the stack. What you're doing now with agents is a full realization of what you were doing back when we first met, except far more intelligently, because the technology has evolved so much.
So the agents is another sort of evolution. So cloud computing, I rode that hype cycle, ended up, selling the company and merging, and that it's still around in some form or another at Dell as a company called VirtuStream. And after that whole thing, I'm like, you lose your identity. What the heck am I gonna do with my life? I just sold the company, and I'm not really sure what to do. So I went over to Citrix for a while, met Mark, which we worked in the same sort of lab, if you will. If you ever watched Silicon Valley, we were the guys on the roof, right? That we're trying to, right? We're trying to figure out what. So Mark and I, Mark was doing the open source stuff with cloud.com and other open source related things. And I was just trying to figure out what Citrix could do. So a lot of the stuff that at Citrix was, what became, not from them, Zoom and others, but left there, went to Microsoft long enough to realize I'm a terrible big company guy, but long enough to be introduced to the OpenAI team and be involved in sort of the initial formative relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI. And that opened the door to learning about the Codex project. So the Codex, for those who aren't familiar with Codex, is what underpins or at least used to underpin the initial GitHub Copilot and other sort of generative capabilities. And so I started coding with the Codex language model that basically sort of augmented my ability to create. And I quickly realized that the combination of someone who's technically proficient and knows how to sort of guide these systems, you can start building anything quite quickly. And long story short, that led to numerous projects. ChatGPT launched in November of 2022. And suddenly I asked ChatGPT, what the heck should I do with this stuff? And it essentially said, you should create some social media following. Well, how in the world do I do that? Well, you should create a Reddit. Well, I don't know anything about Reddit. So I created the Reddit, that blew up. Now we got 60,000 subs. And I've been following this kind of path, right? And building and creating. And a long story short, these agents that I've been able to devise take all the ideas I have, and I can rapidly iterate and create these things in just no time at all. What used to take months or years or where it wasn't even possible, I can now create literally for a LinkedIn post with 40,000 lines of code. Like earlier, I did a DevOps code bot just for the hell of it. 42,000 lines of net new code created in 3 hours for a LinkedIn post, just because.
As you are putting together, and I read all these different prompting frameworks and things that you're doing, when you're pulling this together, what, like, are you building knowledge and building just very complex reasoning methods into your agentics, or are you like, how much is it, the model, how much it is the Reuven, like up leveling and putting together that sort of framework for the agents?
So I have the ability to have these systems build on autopilot. So the key to sort of autonomous building things, and I'm not talking spaghetti code and random junk that gets spit out with security holes and that's vibe coding, right? I'm not sure what I want to build. I just follow the rabbit hole wherever it leads, and that's fine for ideation, but it's not great for production ready code that actually needs to go into an enterprise. To get to that level, what you need to do is create detailed specifications or plans. So generally what I'm doing is researching. So I'm using things like the Perplexity search capability, deep research from OpenAI, and I'm exploring the art of the possible. These are areas that are, one, interesting to me, that I might know enough about to be dangerous, but areas that I may not know anything about at all. Like I built a quantum computing orchestrator, agent, just because I was curious about how quantum computing worked, or a DNA synthesizer that would literally create new genomic information, because I never done that before. And so what I'm doing is I'm going into the systems and saying, okay, I want to create something and I want to use a certain API or a certain technology, a certain programming language. And then I'm saying, tell me everything there is to know about this from a technical point of view. Create me a detailed spec, but don't just create me a detailed specification. Create me a detailed implementation plan that breaks down each step into phases. These phases, it's funny because they come up and say, well, this is going to take you 4 years to develop. That's fine. It literally takes 4 hours. But according to the AI, I think it's going to take 4 years. And then what I do is I can then take those phases and I bring those into VS Code, and I use tools. Right now, the big tool in VS Code, for sort of autonomous development is Roo Code, ROO Code. And what that allows you to do is automate the process of implementing each of those phases. And those phases are implemented using a test-driven development. The tests basically say, is it working? If not, what's broken? And those tests feed back to the AI saying, okay, this didn't work. Therefore, you need to try again and fix it. Now, I've integrated things like web searching and other capabilities as part of that process using MCP servers. MCP acts as a bridge between the local environment and sort of the world, the internet itself. So a lot of the AI was trained on information that was, old or just doing things that don't exist. That allows the AI to go and sort of determine the optimal solution to the problems based on, one, the original plan, the research I'm getting from deep research, the phased development, and then it can kind of implement that all, as a test-driven development framework. So I can literally set it, forget it, go have lunch, go to bed, wake up in the morning, have 100,000 lines of fully functional tested, including security tests, and deployed without me really having to do anything. It's spectacular.
And just to drill down for those that aren't familiar, MCP is Model Context Protocol that's just been released from Anthropic, I guess, back in around October, November timeframe. Is that right?
Yeah, it acts as the local bridge. It's for a hardcore developer or agentic developer like me. It's useful, but I have a tendency to use secondary systems. But if you're just getting started, it's pretty useful. You can use it in like the Claude desktop client, and it basically acts as a bridge between your local environment and other things. It could be like desktop tools. There was a popular demo, I think, earlier this week with Blender, where basically, the MCP server would create 3D environments and orchestrate the Blender application. So there's lots of things you can do with it, and it's a really nice, quick way to sort of bridge between, hey, go build me something in Photoshop or a 3D renderer, and a chat-based interface like Claude.
Before we went into the deep dive around the work you're doing with agents, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, which was you went to ChatGPT after it launched and you asked it what to do with your skills, and it suggested that you build a social media following, and then it told you to do Reddit. So did you literally go to ChatGPT and ask it
It's
for some like life
yes.
coaching, and then it gave you a plan?
It's a genie in a bottle, and that's the craziest part of the story. And I'm happy to tell you, I know it's nuts, but essentially, what I asked it a very self-serving question: how can I be the most influential person in AI? Well, it says you're not going to be the most influential person in AI, but you can be the most influential person in a segment of AI. Okay, well, that's interesting. What's a segment of AI? And it said, well, so conversing back and forth with ChatGPT, V1, it's essentially said, look at things that are the intersection of what you're good at, what you're interested in, and where opportunity lies. Well, that's kind of obvious. And what we determined that I was really interested in autonomous systems and building prompts and applications that could sort of run without any human oversight. So one of the first things I built was an agent that would essentially run by itself, and this was February of 2023, really early days in our space. And then a few months later, I quickly realized that this idea of AI-driven agents was going to be a thing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to call myself an agentic engineer. And this was probably June-ish of 2023. So early days. And everyone's like, what the heck's an agentic engineer? You're crazy. It sounds like some sort of medical procedure, right? And I'm like, oh, no, it's going to be a thing. But this time, I was smarter than I was back in the cloud days. I'm like, I'm going to buy the domain agentics.org because I'm not going to let this cloud thing pass me by again. So I bought the domain and started promoting the concepts of Agentics. Now, what took 6 years in 2003 took 6 months essentially, and everyone starts talking about agents and Agentics, and they're looking at the different architectures, and suddenly I'm the Agentics guy. And back to ChatGPT, it was right. I didn't need to be the most influential person in AI at all. I just needed to dream up a compelling segment of AI that was more interesting and useful than the overall industry itself. Thank you, ChatGPT.
That's an amazing story. When we spoke last, the three of us, and recorded a podcast that we never released, we were talking about agents then. It was June. So this was actually, I had not yet joined Opaque when we first spoke, because we had a call. I remember I was up in Lake Arrowhead, and we had a call, and I was going to join Opaque. We were talking about Opaque for confidential analytics ML, and I was like, look, we have to do Gen AI, and I was spitballing some ideas with you guys. Agents came up, and I'm like, look, that's just like not there yet. We're going to focus on a gateway for LLM models. But it was you're right. It was clear, like in our conversation, we'd be going to this world where people are building agentic architectures that'll look a lot like microservice architectures, but have language models as services that will operate autonomously. It was in my mind probably a couple of years before people started adopting that. Fast forward today, you see, like we were just at Mark's All Things Open AI conference in North Carolina, and it was all about agents. Everything was about agents. It's just amazing how quickly things have moved in this space when compared to previous technology super cycles. Things are just moving so rapidly. And on the agent side is a really clear example of that. And by the way, Reuven, credit to you, because you have been pioneering and driving the adoption of this technology through all of the very prolific communication you do through LinkedIn and other channels.
And not just that, his hackerspace, which what do you call them? Your tribe or something like that?
It's my tribe. It's the irony of AI. I just told you how I interact with ChatGPT to basically reinvent myself from, old time cloud guy to, Agentics, guru or whatever it is you want to call it. Right. I don't even know. But what's interesting is it turns out that it's the people that really matter in AI. And when I say that, you don't have to have 1 million followers. It doesn't matter. What you need is a core tribe, a core group of people who empower each other. And that just needs to be a few hundred, really, capable, interested, people that are willing to contribute. And if you can have 100 people who are 1,000 times more capable than everybody else, you can do anything. And so as soon as I realized that the key to true influence, if that's even meaningful at all, was to find those people and interact with real people and real relationships, like what we're doing right now. AI can't reinvent that. It can't reinvent the connection you have between people, and that's what really set, I think, our initially our AI hacker space apart. We'd have these Friday calls, which grew into live hacking sessions, which grew into an Agentics Foundation. And at the heart of that, it's like, how do we empower people to be more than what they were before? And now it's cheesy, but it's totally true.
It's not cheesy at all. Mark, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the same thing, Hinkle.
Yeah, that's so funny because an hour ago, I published my newsletter, and the name of this week's edition is AI is about people. Some people are scared. They want to make sure that they're getting a better future for AI and not a worse one. And so that's been a driver of me to do these in-person events. And, at the end of the day, it's an augmentation of our life. It shouldn't be a replacement of anything except the stuff that's unpleasant. Like, I grew up on a farm. As soon as they have that horse stall, cow stall cleaning machine that's smart enough to not get my dad to yell at me, I will know that AI has been successful.
Nice. I did see your post, by the way.
Cool.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure I'll read it this weekend. This is applicable to all businesses, and it's particularly true with tech companies because, as you pointed out, Reuven, like if you're able to go build a bespoke application specific to a company's necessary workflows using data that they're generating or that's proprietary to them, you're going to be able to totally disrupt the SaaS vendors who are building legacy software systems. So those legacy software systems that are one size fits all, they take a year or two to do the implementation of the software. You're talking about building a bespoke workflow using AI in a matter of days or weeks. Not just, we spent 10 years building a enterprise software system, and then we're going to spend 2 years deploying it for this particular workflow. You're talking about building something completely bespoke. The point I'm making is, in that scenario, as the commoditization of technology or other brands that are affected by AI are commoditized, it's really the brand itself, the people who represent the brand, the values of that brand that make the difference and why you would want to do business with them. Why would I want to go work with company X versus company Y? It's not because they're going to give me a better technology for cheaper. It's going to be totally commoditized. It's because they actually represent my values through their brand better, and I feel a closer affinity to them. This is something that Dave Hirsch, I don't know if you guys know Dave, he's doing a lot of really exciting work. He was the CEO of Jive Software. He's been an investor. He's been a CEO. He's a wonderful guy. He writes and talks a great deal about the people aspect of companies and how AI is accelerating the need for this in business.
The ability to create custom software, and not just, I'm not talking, a lot of the traditional, let's call them the old school developers are going to point out vibe coding's garbage. And I agree with them. It's garbage. It's created by amateurs and you're going to get amateur output. Those who know what they're doing, this is an exponential increase in capability. And when you look at my output, and someone did a measurement of my GitHub over the last 12 months, and this was like as of November, so it's probably even crazier now. But from between January and November of last year, I put about 10 million lines of usable functional code, and 10 million lines. Put that in perspective. If I was an average individual puts out on a workday between 6 and a really good developer might put out 20, a super developer might put out 50 lines of code in a day, right? I can comfortably put out 100,000, if not more, in a single day, right? And 10 million lines of code represents 33,000 years of output, and that makes me something like 10,000 times more productive than your average developer, right? So that opens up two fundamental questions, right? If I'm either one of two things, I'm either, well, maybe three things. I'm either crazy, I'm either an outlier or a leading indicator, right? And if I'm a leading indicator, what that means is in the next few months, few years, there'll be a lot more people like me capable of doing what was once thought impossible, relatively easily. That means that I can go and not just create applications, but I can duplicate entire stacks of unseen SaaS applications, verbatim, but in a kind of polymorphic structure, meaning I can implement it without ever seeing the original code and make it work basically the same way in a high fidelity. And when that's possible, that means I can literally conjure anything I want instantly at any level of complexity. So that then the next question is, well, if you have these people who can implement these ridiculously complicated, systems by just asking a series of the right questions with the right structure, what does that mean for development? Well, it does a couple things, I think. One, it changes the nature of development from a sort of technical process. I'm no longer a technician. I'm an orchestrator. I'm a director. I'm a kind of maestro in front of the orchestra, waving my hands around, saying, "Here's what I want," and letting the orchestra do the rest, right? And that's the key difference. So will that usher in an age of unemployment or a golden age of capability and development of things that were never possible? I'm an optimist. I think we're going into an age of abundance of capability, knowledge, and an understanding that was not possible before. Maybe that's just because I'm a positive guy. Now there will likely be some disruption in traditional jobs, but I think those who embrace it will adapt, and those who don't, well, they'll be selling horse whips when everyone's driving Model Ts, I guess.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is this. I don't know if you guys ever read Master Switch by Tim Wu. It's a great book. He writes about information economies going from highly centralized to highly decentralized and how the pendulum swings back and forth. And he tracks it from like telegraph to radio to the internet. And what I think we're seeing right now with AI is a fragmentation, which is positive because it flattens the earth for developers to deliver value to individuals and businesses. You don't have to be a very large software company to deliver significant value for a company because AI can help you do that much more swiftly. So my hope is that this leads to a period of decentralization where individuals can benefit from the value of software in a manner that isn't maintained by gatekeepers inside of very large enterprises. Hey, so your GitHub is RuvNet. So RUVNET is where you are on GitHub, right?
ReuvenNet, I've recently launched the Agentics Foundation a few weeks ago. So some of the newer stuff, especially with Agentics, is Agentics.org. In particular, you'll see that I've launched a edge functions, or edge agents, which basically allow you to run serverless agents, which if you're looking at doing a lot of stuff that I'm doing, that's probably where you want to start. A security system that'll do nightly security agentic scans of any repo in your own code, tell you, whatever your vibe coders are developing, whether it's secure or not. And today I launched a DevOps agent that basically will deploy your code to any cloud environment, point it at your GitHub and say, deploy me a cluster and handle all the IAM rules and all the VPCs and all the complexities of DevOps. It'll do it all. All you need to do is ask it.
So that was my next question, is agentics.org. Why don't you tell us what it is, why Hinkle has a title associated with it and I don't? Why wasn't I invited? I thought we were Wu-Tang Clan and
yeah.
I'm left out.
You are invited, by the way.
You're old DB, man.
Good. I want to be ODB.
Yeah, ODB. Yeah. The key here was I've got all this output. We've got 60,000 subs on Reddit, most of which tell me I'm a jerk. But and we've got all these people on LinkedIn, another 60 or whatever on LinkedIn in the group, and then we got a core group of about 1,200 in the WhatsApp channel. And to be honest, 1,200 are the ones that actually matter. They're the ones that are actually involved. And so it became clear that we needed some organization to encapsulate that. And I've been down this sort of road with venture capitalists. I have a disdain towards venture capitalists. We'll leave it at that. But I want to do something different. I've done startups. I've done the VC thing. I want to do something that would, I don't want to sound like a cheese ball, but like a legacy, something I could leave behind, something that would make the world better than I left it. And I had this group of people who were sort of like, we should do something. It should be not for profit. And back in the day, I did the Cloud Camp, and I'd learned a lot about Cloud Camp and all the things I shouldn't have done. It was too organic. It kind of took on a life of its own, and it was really hard to manage because we didn't have like a core organization. I'm like, okay, if I could do Cloud Camp 2.0, what would it be? So taking all the lessons of the things we did wrong in Cloud Camp, and Cloud Camp did really well. We were in 300 cities. We had hundreds of thousands of people attend our events in person across those 300 cities, and we had 2,000 sponsors. And we had zero management. So it was just a wild sort of mess. So I'm like, well, let's do that, but let's organize it in a more structured way. So now 3 weeks later, we've got people who've signed up to open up chapters in 60 plus cities around the globe. We've got all these opportunities for, these people who are contributing their time and code and effort around different activities we want to do, learning, building the website, building demos, various other structures. And we're looking to launch our first actual physical location. There's a group in San Francisco who've kindly offered us some space. We've got another spot in Singapore. So all this is kind of organically happening, but with a guidance towards like doing good, organizing ourselves more efficiently and effectively. And ultimately, I kind of cross between like the Apache Foundation meets like the Linux Foundation in a kind of federated, global, location-based approach. So it's like Cloud Camp meets the Apache org, maybe something like that. It's like everything Mark's taught me over the last 19 years.
Well, if you need space in San Francisco, Opaque can help out there, or San Diego. And I'm sure Hinkle can help you out with figuring out space in North Carolina and incorporate.
We've got a chapter looking at opening in North Charlotte. I think it's
okay. That's about 2 hours away, but I'm all about building that like communities that intersect, and so we have 2,000. Well, we have like 22,000 people that across all of our groups here in North Carolina that are interested in AI. So I saw an awesome presentation this week from Rachel Lee Neighbor, who was talking about agentic web, which was fascinating. Like, let's stop going to web pages and have agents just deliver the data without all the crap. We saw our former colleagues, Shen and Shannon from cloud.com and now Acorn. They did a demo of their new open source agent, OBot, that was really cool. Like taking the same simplicity of ChatGPT for folks that are not quite as advanced as Reuven and his tribe to just actually make something useful that happens a lot better than some of the other platforms.
Let's talk agentic frameworks here. What is your current assessment of agentic frameworks, open source or proprietary? Give us like the quick teardown, Reuven.
There's an unusual fascination with Python, and I think that's a legacy point of view. And I actually, my DevOps thing I built today, I built in Python but I think that a lot of the most interesting things that are happening with agentic frameworks are not actually happening with Pythonic-centric frameworks like LangChain or the new NVIDIA framework that came out earlier this week. The issue you face with a lot of these agentic frameworks is they're bloated and slow. And that's not just me calling out some of the larger players that want to support their sort of consulting partners, which is likely why they built it in the way they did. When you're looking at agent-based deployments, you're looking at narrow, not broad. The more specifically focused the application is in terms of its tool use and its application and deployment, the faster it's going to be and the less problems you're going to have. So when you're looking at these, and I think you mentioned microservices earlier, that's a really good analogy. Microservices and serverless architectures. So microservices is the ability to orchestrate information. Now, at the end of each one of those endpoints doesn't necessarily just have to be, static information that's returned based on the post or put or get or whatever it happens to be. It can actually be intelligence that can then make decisions based on the information you're requesting of it. The faster that can happen and the more temporary that is, the better. So when you look at structures like TypeScript for doing serverless functions, you've got cold start times in under 1 second, sometimes 30 milliseconds. And these processes run temporarily, sometimes for literally a few seconds until they're done. A lot of these Python systems assume an always running sort of environment, which is silly. I'm not going to spawn 100,000 agents and have them run consistently and continually. It makes no sense. But I am going to create 100,000 threads that run momentarily and get the job done just long enough to do whatever they need to do. So when you're looking at these agentic structures and processes, stop thinking of them like traditional web applications, traditional web endpoints, and start thinking of them as temporary, temporary threads that just need to run just long enough to do the thing they need to do. And when you start thinking about it that way, you realize Python makes no sense. So the next big move is probably away from these types of heavy, slow, enterprise-centric, what even is enterprise-centric, heavy and slow, I suppose, to fast and temporary.
Do you think it's going to look like it's going to create ephemeral serverless functions from scratch every time and then run them and then shut them down? Or do you think it's going to have a library of functions that it builds, but still deploys them like a serverless function would be deployed?
Ephemeral. Ephemeral is exactly what I'm doing.
Okay.
I call them sometimes meta agents.
Yep.
So I've got, if you're familiar with structures in TypeScript and Node.js, like Yeoman, for example, that creates a sort of structure that you can sort of guide the development. So you can use this approach to say, here's the sort of single file agent structure. And a lot of these edge functions act or Lambda functions act as a single file. And then what you can use is that as a kind of scaffolding that says, modify the bits that I need in terms of logic and structure based on, a kind of tool structure that can be dynamically inserted as the agent is created. So you have self-replicating code that dynamically generates bits and pieces that it needs to do if and when it needs to do it. So there is you've got a clear scaffolding and sort of overarching structure for your agent. But by creating a kind of meta agent, it can create and do things that was never even programmed originally to do dynamically if and when it needs to do it.
What I think you're describing, Reuven, is you're already on to the next phase of agents. And here's what I mean by that. We're seeing today a proliferation of agents for business automation, enterprise automation. And in that scenario, they're using these frameworks like LangChain, maybe with LangFlow for the UI, or Crew AI. Those are not great tools for app dev. You're doing app dev, which I'm not diminishing it. That's actually a much more challenging problem. You're building an agentic app dev framework that has to be much more performant, and for the sake of cost, if you're building applications on this, you don't want these things running in the background. So you're of course taking a serverless approach, right? Everything you're describing to me is like you've already jumped to the next phase of agents, and that's a compliment, mind you.
Cost is a concern, especially when you're running sometimes thousands of these things at once. And so serverless is, especially with edge functions and Lambda functions and similar, are the only real inherent cost is the request to the LLM. And in terms of that cost, you can get around that by hosting your own LLM on a GPU instance somewhere, and then the costs are negligible as well. So the idea of agents creating new agents, a kind of meta agent development is not just possible. I'm doing it. And it's the advancements we've seen in sort of agentic code development is very, it's what I'm able to do today I wasn't able to do in November. We've seen a kind of jump in coding capability between November and today that's almost hard to even describe in terms of its capability. If I was doing 60% of the work in November, the agents now are doing 100% now. And that's
amazing.
Less than 6 months.
Yeah. So going back to the frameworks, are you using any frameworks right now? Or you're just rolling your own stuff?
I roll a lot of my own, but I mix and match, wherever possible. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I do like the Node.js implementation of LangGraph. It's light, it's easy, it's got good tooling. The OpenAI agents API and SDK, if you don't mind being kind of locked into that ecosystem, is fantastic. They've done everything right in that platform in terms of the ease of which you can create dozens or potentially thousands of concurrent agents that are able to hand off information to each other to keep continuous context, to integrate vector stores in an astronomically fast way. Web search is integrated. So when you look at some of my tools recently, you'll see that I'm depending heavily on some of the OpenAI agent framework. It's great. Other than the LLM itself, it's cheap, it's easy. It doesn't require me to worry about the sort of fundamentals of the architecture. It's just another API endpoint at the end of the rainbow on an edge function. So if you're looking to get started quickly, check out the OpenAI agents API. I literally is up and running with complex workflows in 10 minutes. And to do that, all I did was point my client or root code or cursor at the repo and said, go build me a hello world. Or you could use my hello world and point at that, and you're even further ahead. So it's great. That's where I would start. And if you are looking to do like a so-called enterprise deployment, you need to be in your own environment, think about using TypeScript and start with NPMs and avoid the pip.
Avoid the pip. So what you're doing with this ephemeral stuff, it's harder for organizations, especially large regulated organizations, to control if they will be laggards in adopting this, because they'll want bespoke agents with access control levels and logs and all that stuff, versus what you're doing is pretty much, spin up, build something, accomplish a task, spin down. There's probably not the audit trail and the things that...
No, not at all. Every single thing that happens, there's an audit trail. They've got, they got tracing, they got introspection. If you've ever used the deep research or reasoning capabilities in ChatGPT, where you see the sort of steps in terms of reasoning, they expose all that as a separate text stream. So when you're making a request, you can actually see what's happening and what underpins the decision. You can create a feedback loop that actually allows you to optimize that decision process as well. Unlike using the ChatGPT UI, you can actually, that search or that step in the reasoning process wasn't right. I can have another agent, provide feedback to the original agent saying, no, that wasn't what we wanted. And I can see that all in real time. I can put that in a real-time channel. I can store every transaction as a vector. Now, what's really amazing about that, when I have code bots, I can vectorize each change using a unified diff structure. What's amazing about that is as the bot is iterating through the code, creating whatever it needs to create, it might have created a different structure a day ago or an hour ago or whatever it was. That gets saved into the vector. The bots, as they build or do whatever they need to do, can then refer to the historical context of how it was built, not just on a file basis, but on a line by line or function basis, and then say, well, last week we went down this path and it worked, but we decided against it for whatever reason. I'm going to recycle that content. And because it's a vector, you can use similarity and instantly have that information regardless of the size of your repo. So whether it's 100 lines of code or 100 million lines of code makes no difference because it's all vectorized. And that provides an audit trail, a multi-dimensional audit trail across, both time and space. So temporal as well as what was built and how it was built. So it's just incredible what you can do. And so when it comes to audit, there's nothing that I don't know in terms of what was done and how it was done.
I guess that's the lesson. Never assume that AI hasn't thought of it and implemented it.
Well, a Reuven with an AI friend anyway.
Roof with an AI friend. What about security, Aaron? So, you know, we have these agents and they are, can scale to hundreds of thousands of virtual employees for every person. What does that mean? Like, are they 100%? Is there a way to really secure them tightly? Like, what happens when you have an agent that starts to leak a little bit of data?
The the thing we're seeing in the enterprise with our customers, and our current focus is enterprise scale, high tech, banking, financial services, insurance. Although we have people coming to us from healthcare, from government, from life science, our focus is really high tech, BFSI. The challenge they have is they're seeing these AI adoption waves. Most of them are all out of pilot. Now they're in production. But the production deployments that they have will be simple RAG pipelines involving knowledge based content that's not particularly sensitive. Or it'll be Gen AI features that they've built into their products that are using data that is not sensitive. So that's what I would think of as the second wave. The first wave is sandbox, a bunch of pilots deployed. Everybody's out of that much quicker than I'd actually expected. The next wave is plateau. They're deploying AI customer facing and for internal automation to augment their employees, but none of the data is particularly sensitive. If they leak it, they're not going to get hit with regulatory fines. It's not so sensitive that they have concerns around the proprietary data. That's wave 3. That's the AI powerhouse. In the third wave, when it involves proprietary data, why they come to opaque is a lot of these systems have audit trails, but you have to be entirely in that ecosystem to get a complete audit trail. And they're taking data from multiple places and they're deploying models from multiple places. Sometimes they're combining models from Azure, ChatGPT, with Gemini, and also their own small language models. So a lot of these are being hosted in a singular environment. So what Opaque is delivering for them is agentic workflows with an audit trail that spans all of those interactions and also is signed by the GPUs or CPUs, so it's tamper-proof and verifiable that the audit trail is accurate. From the beginning, when you're creating a connection to a data source or creating an interaction with an agent, we do an attestation process that allows the customer to verify and prove that it's an approved data connection, that the data is encrypted, or that it's an approved agent. So that's the before execution attestation process. During, all of it runs in an encrypted environment using confidential computing, and their data policies are cryptographically enforced. The data is processed in an encrypted trusted execution environment inside the GPU or CPU, and it's then after provable through the attested audit trail. So Reuven is always like on very much the bleeding edge where he's kicking out these incredible projects very quickly. When the enterprise goes to deploy Reuven's work inside of an environment that has multiple data sources, not one in a single data lake. If it's just one, you can make sure it's secure. But when they're pulling it from dozens of systems of records, it's interoperating with a whole bunch of different agents running on different cloud infrastructures. That's when Opaque makes it verifiable and provides the attested audit trail.
It's cool. Lots of interesting opportunities there. 100%. For me, the interesting part of that is the attestation, as you point out. Who verifies it? Using a TPM or some other sort of hardware verifiable component. Everything I do is soft, right? It's I'm assuming that the cloud infrastructure is secure and I trust them, and that's choosing a big vendor. That's the extent of my security posture. And for a lot of companies, that isn't good enough, right? And I can see where what you're doing would be of significant value for sure.
The interesting thing that I've seen, Reuven, since when we first started speaking about this is Apple does this now. Microsoft does it. Amazon does it. Google does this. Meta does this. TikTok does this. So all of them have adopted this approach to confidential AI internally with their customers. So they're now doing confidential AI with attestation, processing during encryption, even during the inferencing stage, and then also the attested audit trails at all of these companies. That has happened significantly faster than I had expected. When we spoke back in June of 2023, I remember I was like, I don't know, guys, I think we might be a little too early. Opaque may be a little bit too early to market, because when are people going to get into this wave 3 with sensitive data? Will they care? And the clear answer is, yeah, absolutely. We're seeing it within our customer base, like ServiceNow, Encore Capital, a bunch of financial services, and a handful of high tech. Since we're pretty early on, it's still in the handfuls. But what I'm seeing that makes it obvious that we're onto something and that everybody's going to be adopting this is when all of the big boys are adopting it. Everybody else is obviously if it's their cloud infrastructure and they're doing this, it's in their data centers and they're doing this. So everybody else is going to be adopting this tech, just like HTTPS. The same thing with HTTPS.
Yeah, and the biggest challenge I think we have in AI is the ease of which you take all the things I've been telling you in terms of the great parts of building and deploying, and the inverse is like it's just as easy to create hackbots that do all the things I just said autonomously and can find and exploit all the worst or best opportunities in your infrastructure, and do so in a way that is obfuscated and polymorphic and really, really hard to detect. And the bar for that kind of, what used to be state level, hacking is now anyone that just knows how to ask a few of the right questions in a way that doesn't set off the, ChatGPT's, usage guidelines or whatever. And you can ask what seems like an innocuous, DevOps bot inversely could be a exploit bot with just a semantic difference in how it's deployed, right? And that's the challenge that we have right now.
So you bring up such a great point. Reluca, who's one of the founders of Opaque, she still teaches at Berkeley and is a co-director at the Skylab at UC Berkeley, but she joined DeepMind to lead research on AI or AGI security. And they just quietly dropped a paper last week about zero-day exploits. And it talks exactly about what you're describing. And the interesting thing too is, let's say that people are taking DeepSeek and deploying it inside their enterprise. Well, this week, I think it was this week, or no, it was last week too. Anthropic, you saw that paper that they released around hidden objectives within the model. There's nothing preventing a foreign actor from putting hidden objectives inside of a model to egress data or to quietly change data to be malformed or to identify hacks within your internal environments. So this is going to become a much bigger problem, because it's like, well, sure, you can deploy a model, you can put some parameters on what the model can and can't do, but if the model's reasoning and operating autonomously and you don't have the confidential architecture around it, it can actually do some pretty nefarious things inside of an enterprise environment.
The injection and poisoning of language models is not that difficult. You just need to create a GitHub that's decently popular and it's being trained on the next generation of language models, right? So you're in, essentially. The 10 million lines of code that I cranked out last year will likely be in the next major language model because it's, extensive, right? So if I was nefarious, I could put in lots of stuff that would be obfuscated to a point where only I would know that was even possible, and I could create potential backdoors and have my agent scour the internet and find those backdoors. I'm not that kind of guy, but that's what someone's likely doing, and that's the challenge that we have right now. And it's really hard to protect against symbolism, right? So if I'm going to do that, and I'm not trying to give you a how-to here, but if hypothetically, I'm not doing that with natural language. I'm doing that.
You actually did some work around symbolic languages with communicating to chatbots. Yeah. And I think with LLMs, that's exactly where you're going, right? First start off with explaining what you meant by the symbolic language and some of the work you did on that, Reuven, and then go into how it could be weaponized.
Turns out I can pretty much exploit any language model by bypassing natural language itself and using a combination of symbolism and abstract reasoning or abstract algebra. And as soon as you define your problem set using various types of mathematical equations, the language model isn't able to understand its guardrails, because the guardrails have been implemented using natural language. You should, you shouldn't, do this, do that. using symbolism and sub-symbolism and neuro sub-symbolism allows you to manipulate the language model using the very foundation of the neural networks inside the model itself, and guide the output in a way that doesn't sort of activate the natural language components that tells it what it shouldn't do. So when you want to manipulate these systems and poison these systems, the key to it is to do so in a way that is, not seen by humans. So language models, turns out, can actually communicate more efficiently, not using regular language, but using their own interpretation of the language. So all I need to do is create the structures for exploitation using symbolic reasoning, and wait for ChatGPT, GPT-5 to index my repo, and I've got the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, there was a simple example that Raluca gave at one of our tech. We do this every 2 or 3 months. We have a regional technology executive AI salon, and Rube, we've got to do one up near you so that we've got you there, since I know you're disinclined to fly out to San Francisco these days. But she gave an example where her students at Berkeley were communicating with a model using just a simple ciphertext. And when they started communicating with the model in ciphertext, it immediately just began communicating back in ciphertext. Like they were using a old Roman crypto scheme for ciphertext is what they were using. Like
Caesar,
we're talking
Caesar.
Thank you, a Caesar cipher.
That's moving. I think that's moving the letter or character one space over or whatever. Yeah.
So very, very simple Caesar cipher, but the chatbot needed no instruction whatsoever, or the LLM needed no instruction, and it just began communicating in that format. It immediately knew. What you're describing is even more interesting, which takes this to an entirely different level, which is you can create a symbolic language in which you give instructions into the large language model that then either gets indexed as part of the training or circumvents any of the guardrails. So then you can get it to do things that it's been told not to do, or inject backdoors so that when it generates code, it's actually nefariously injecting backdoors into the code that then you can go crawl the internet, find where your backdoors are, and open those doors.
It's worse than that. So not only can I insert the sort of, unrecognizable garbage, what appears to be garbage text and code, I can then encrypt that using, just straight up, 256 type encryption. And then, so not only is it encrypted, injected into the language model, but only I have the key to it. So it's double. So it's using a abstract algebra, symbolism, and encrypted on top of all that only one person potentially knows how to decrypt, right? So that is really, really difficult to sort of, protect against, unless you're just stripping out anything that looks like, garbage or encryption. But the problem with that is you can use polymorphic structures to make it look like it's something that it isn't. So I can then take that encrypted information and make it look like a run-of-the-mill hello world, TypeScript file. But the entire hello world TypeScript file is actually a neurosymbolic encrypted data poisoning structure intended to be injected into a language training model that just looks like regular TypeScript.
This reminds me, there used to be a programming language when I was in college. I'm typing, I shouldn't be. It was called Brainfuck. And it was a programming language entirely with white space characters.
Back to my Python rant. That is the biggest issue you have with Pythonic code development is blank space, indents. The primary reason why you don't want to do agentic coding with Python is it struggles with indents. And Python is literally the worst possible programming language for agentic development because it's not typed. It uses blank space, indents, all the worst possible things for a language model that needs explicit sort of output. The reason why I love TypeScript is it's typed. There is no concepts of blank space or anything silly like that. So you're not doing 50 revs on, just trying to fix, indents. Reason number 2 to avoid Python is and funny enough, things like Java, not JavaScript, Java is actually better for agentic code development for all the same reasons.
I had not thought about that. I did not think about encrypting the symbolic language, like symbolic algebra instructions for poisoning a model. I had not considered that. That's really dark.
And it's doable. I'm not even saying I'm not. You can dig around my portal to figure out how, but I'm not doing it. The one thing I did do, just while I'm on the topic, I know we're almost out of time, but I created a application, a little tiny little application, and then I used my DNA analysis tool to basically look at my potential familiar offspring. So I guess will only work for on my wife's side, the kids, 3 generations, 5, 10, 200 years down the road, that will unlock and give a secret message from their great great grandfather based on this.
Wait. Explain that again. Wait,
Yeah,
where is this hidden?
I'm not gonna tell you because I'm gonna let my offspring 200 years down the road find it and do like Treasure Hunt the movie or whatever. And I even put in some crypto. I'm not a big fan of crypto, just to throw it out there, but I even put in some crypto stuff so that maybe in 200 years it's actually valuable. But and this is me sharing it, so they'll maybe we'll find it in some generation down the road. But yeah, it basically uses a version of what I just described, not for taking over people's infrastructure or anything, but basically just allowing my offspring at some point to get a little hidden message from their great great grandfather.
That's clever. Well, Reuven, thanks so much for coming out and hanging out with us. We are getting Wu-Tang together, the AI version of Wu-Tang. You are RZA, I'll be Jizza, Hinkle, or I'll be ODB. I'm fine with ODB too.
Those are the only two that I know.
I forget the other ones. And
there's Ghostface.
Oh yeah,
Killer.
Ghostface Killer.
That's me.
Yeah, I want to be Ghostface Killer.
Is anybody still wearing cargo shorts today? I'm wearing a hoodie and sweats.
I stopped wearing cargo shorts in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
mid 2000s.
My kids told me I'm not allowed to wear them anymore. They said it's a dad uniform or something. But, I could put all this stuff in the size, but, anyway.
I know. It was really convenient. The pockets were so nice. Reuven, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to hang out and chat with you again. We got to make this a regular habit.
Well, it's my pleasure. I love to talk, and I love you guys. So I really appreciate you, including me. And until next time, really, I had a great time here.
I love you guys.
Love you guys.
Well, it's always a treat to hang out and chat with Ruben. Guys, so much fun. The thing that really stood out for me was his points around model poisoning and prompt injection. When he was writing up his post about using symbolic algebra, I was like, oh my God, that's so dangerous. It didn't even occur to me. And then him bringing up the point about encrypting it, just super interesting segment. What stood out for you, Mark?
What I saw from Ruben that was interesting was just the now granted, he comes from the cloud background where we dealt with elastic ephemeral infrastructure. So the fact that he validated that he thinks agents will be like serverless functions that will spin up and spin down and that we will write them on the fly is where I imagine things will go. I think the same kind of ephemeral infrastructure will replace RAG at some point, where we're actually, writing a RAG pipeline that is connecting almost like a serverless function as well to inform our AI, and not necessarily having static, streaming of data there.
This is the thing I've said since the beginning of my career, is like everything new is something old moved up stack and made more intelligent. Yeah. It's moved up stack. It's more accessible. It's made more intelligent. It's a pattern that repeats itself. Mark, talking about agents, we always talk about the emerging AI use case. This, it's hard for me to say, is it the emerging AI use case? Because everybody's talking about it. Every opaque customer, every opaque sales call, it's all about agents. So is it the emerging AI use case? What's your sense?
I think it is, and this is why. Agents are different than other software. You got to think about an agent almost like you think about a entry-level employee. They come in with a level of knowledge, but for you to get really, really good results, you got to put the training and the development around that agent. So that's building their knowledge base, giving them more direction, giving them feedback. So while they are here, I still think that the ramp up time for a new agent in a lot of cases will be the same ramp up time for a new employee. And this is a more sophisticated agent. The way we get around it today is by making the agent's tasks so narrow. So, for example, I do newsletters, and I have one agent that I've trained on newsletter headlines from this really smart guy who's like a new newsletter guru.
Brad Wolverton, right?
It's called the Brad Wolverton agent. It actually is. Brad Wolverton is our producer, by the way. And anyhow, but no, he had this is really good illustration, because he had spent years and years doing newsletters, and he had codified his learnings into a Twitter thread. And so I took his Twitter thread and turned it into my knowledge base. And then as I create newsletters, the goal was to get a better open rate. And then I use my own examples based on feedback. So I tried Brad's tips, and some of them worked for my audience, some didn't. But you have that feedback. It's called reinforcement learning through human feedback. I'm ordering the knowledge base so that the agent gets better. And I think that everybody's agent, if you don't have a knowledge base and you haven't trained it, is pretty much the same. And I think I've heard you say this so many times this week, it's burned in my brain, is the only advantage that you have in AI is going to be your sovereign data. And my sovereign data, it is my content. In a financial services sovereign data is going to be their financial history, things that are not public. Everybody's going to have trade data, but they're not going to have their insights from their proprietary data.
We're already seeing people deploying agents. People are challenged with deploying agents with their proprietary data, particularly if they're in a large enterprise where it can move stock markets. Like if it's Mark, Hinkle, and your 300,000 subscriber list today, newsletter consortium, probably not super sensitive, probably not super sought after. But if you're a large enterprise or an enterprise that's publicly traded, doing any manner of industry, you need to really protect that data. The thing we get into with Reuven too is we're talking about agents. There's agentic workflows for automation and app dev stuff related to agentic architectures.
And actually, I am going to tell you contraire, mon frere. So here's the thing is I feel like my data is going to be a huge advantage for me, even though it's been put out there publicly, it's my copyrighted data. I'm going to use that data to train small language models. So I may have my Brad GPT that helps me with that. Eventually, I'll have my AI enterprise model that will help with my doing all of that, where I'm going to use agents that will call the model, and that will power it as much as the OpenAI models or Google Gemini or, any of DeepSeek, whatever, because that is the context. Even though it's not super secret, people will be able to look at it, but technically they shouldn't scrape my website if I don't have the search enabled for indexing, and they shouldn't be allowed to use copyrighted data. So I think that's when you have super secret stuff, if you're doing drug discovery, yeah, you're gonna guard that. But even the everyday person that does Instagram content or Facebook, that data should have value to them.
I mean, Brad's data has value to him, and you stole it. And you used
stole
it to build a GPT.
But if you put it on Twitter, X, it's all free game. Plus, then I directed thousands of people back to him to say, this is the man.
I guess, I'll revise the emerging AI use case. We started saying it's agents. It's not. It's all about retaining the sovereignty of your data. That's the emerging AI use case is.
Yeah. I mean, context is king. And that context comes from your data.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show and you want to learn more about how to use AI responsibly, check out our website at opaque.co. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We genuinely want to hear from you and would love your feedback. This episode of AI Confidential was produced by Wolverton Media Solutions of Brad Wolverton and Opaque, the leading confidential AI platform. I'm Aaron Fulkerson.
And I'm Mark Hinkle. We'll see you next time, and keep in touch via my newsletters at The Artificially Intelligent Enterprise. Subscribe at theaie.net. See you later.